10 years ago, our family cat had to have an operation and came back a much meaner cat. Yesterday, my mom revealed to me the cat had died during surgery and they had gotten an almost identical new one and never told us. Reddit, what grey lies have your parents told you for your own benefit? My dad and I had rabbits growing up. One day, I'm assuming a dog got into the cage and ripped one of the rabbits to shreds. I remember vividly watching my dad picking up the rabbit pieces with a dustpan in the yard. When I asked my dad what had happened to Patches, he said he got a disease. For many years after, I thought rabbits could get diseases that made them spontaneously explode. My parents bred rabbits, always sold them to this Asian man and Italian families. I thought these people really loved rabbits. Turns out they did, just not in the friendly fluffy pet kinda way. This is actually a grey lie told to one of my parents. My granddad was a pilot in World War II, and when my mum was little, so that she wouldn't grow up thinking daddy killed people, they told her he just dropped leaflets, not bombs. This came out at a large family dinner. As it turned out, she'd never realized it wasn't true. The looks on everyone's faces as my mum asked him to confirm it was just leaflets, and he conceded that actually the leaflets were somewhat dangerous and explode. They were quite something. Shortly after we got a new kitten, one of my other cats got hit by a car. My parents told me the cat sacrificed himself by pushing the kitten out of the way of the car. Kind of a weird thing to lie about, but I guess it did soften the blow a little bit. When I was really young, my dad ran over our dog Bruno on Christmas Eve and told us that Santa had run him over with his sleigh. For years, I believed Santa had accidentally killed our dog. Not sure how that was supposed to make things better. He could have said Bruno was adopted as a reindeer or something, not dead. Our pet pot-bellied pig was hit by a truck and it shattered his pelvis. The vet put him down cause there was nothing he could do. My dad just told the vet to incinerate the pig. When he got home, my mom and us kids asked dad where the pig's body was so we could bury him. He got a bunch of junk, food from the freezer and blankets and stuff, and stuffed them inside a large garbage bag. We then buried the garbage bag. There was a eulogy. Food from the freezer. The vet didn't think you'd want him back, so he made some sausages. My mum replaced my Russian dwarf hamster Pocahontas about 5 times before finally she got fed up with it. I didn't find out she'd been replacing my hamster until a couple of years ago when some asked me how long hamsters live for, and I said about 10 years, and she laughed and then told me. Russian dwarf hamsters have weird but common infections. Mine is currently a pirate hamster, due to an eye infection. When I was younger, my parents employed a terrible babysitter for a while. She would let her own kids set fire to or cut up our belongings while she sat on her fat butt playing Tetris all day. I would race home after getting off the school bus in an effort to catch my father before he left for work, so I could get permission to go to a friend's house instead of to the babysitter's. I only found out in the past year or so that he didn't actually work at the time, but was suffering through depression. So, instead of just giving me permission to go to my friends every day after school, he'd lock all the doors, turn off all the lights, and ignore my knocking. Yeah, well, whoa, that's a much darker grey. When I was little, my grandpa used to go out to Las Vegas with some of his army buddies. So one day I came home from school. We lived with my grandparents, and I said, "Hey, where's grandpa?" Mom said he went to Vegas with his friends. I didn't remember him packing, but just kinda accepted it. A week later we drive to the hospital. I'm totally confused at this point. And there's my grandpa in a hospital bed. He had a massive heart attack. And since I was so close to him, they didn't want to tell me. My grandmother swears this never happened and I'm imagining things, but I've gotten my mom to sheepishly admit to it. When I got my car at 16, my dad told me that if I ever ran out of gas, the mechanic would have to reprogram my car's computer and it would cost me over $1,000. I made sure to keep the tank at least 1/4 full of gas because I didn't want to have to pay that money to get it fixed. It probably kept me from getting stranded out in the middle of nowhere and was a pretty clever little story to tell because I was already a penny pincher back then. Almost 20 years later I brought this story up to him, and my dad swore up and down that he would never tell me a lie like that. I have a friend that currently believes this. I don't know if his parents told it to him to keep him from running out on gas, or if they actually believe it. Either way, I never say anything because I think it's funny. He's currently 26, for reference. We adopted a rescued racing greyhound when I was young. He was lovely and very fast. Unfortunately, he had to be put down quite soon after we got him because, according to my parents, he had something wrong with his brain from running round the track constantly making him dizzy all the time. I brought this up when I was in my late teens and my parents admitted that he actually had ripped the neighbor's cat to shreds. Racing greyhounds are trained to chase mechanical rabbits, and so he was deemed too dangerous to live. Your parents' explanation was semi-accurate. The best lies are the ones that resemble truth. When I was younger, my parents got my siblings and I a golden retriever. He was the best dog in the world, in my 8-year-old eyes. One day he just started crapping all over the house, and a few days later he ran away. According to my parents, I stood outside in freezing cold weather for hours, crying and yelling his name and for him to come home. Of course, he never returned. A few years ago, on a hunch, I asked my mom if that's what really happened, and she told me, no. Marshall ate a thermometer, the glass ones filled with mercury, off of the counter and went crazy, hence the crapping everywhere. So we had to put him down. At that point I was old enough to understand that they did what they had to do, but they could have at least made me come inside and stop calling for him. They were probably sobbing uncontrollably at the sight in front of them. The image of you standing in the cold yelling for your dog is sadder than the ending of Molly and Me. Years ago when I was in junior high, my stepdad died from cancer. He and my mother knew this was coming, so they went and picked out a nice house to buy with the insurance money. Later mom told me that he also wanted to take care of us, so he had set aside money for all of our college funds. Well, college comes up and mom swears she never said that, so community college. So, my mom died when I was 15. She had told me that she was born in North Dakota and her maiden name was Youngblood. Shows up like that on my birth certificate. She also said she was an only child. Anyway, she passed away and my dad and I always thought that she never told us the full story. When we compared stories she had told us separately, the small details would never match, or something big would be different. My dad told me about a time he had found some wedding photo of her when they first got married, but of a much younger her. He said he could never find it again. So, about 6 years after she died, I was at home one day when my dad comes through the door. He was really serious and had this worried look on his face. He asked me to sit down. At the time thought we were going to have an argument about dishes. He told me that he got a phone call from someone that I should know about. That someone turned out to be my mom's sister who neither of us had a clue existed. In one 10 minutes conversation I found out the following about my mother. 1. My mother was born in New York and was 13 years younger than we had been led to believe, and she had given us a false birthday. 2. She never told us her real name. Her real name was not even close to the name we had always known her by. 3. I have a half sister. 4. Her family was huge and lived on the East Coast. 5. She had been married to some guy in the military. 6. She never kept in contact with any of her family and they never knew about us until they tried to find her. That sounds spooky and intriguing. I desperately want to know more. My father told me Ringo Starr had to stop being Mr. Conductor on Shining Time Station because he lost his accent and was so embarrassed he would no longer appear in public. Apparently you hadn't seen the Christmas episode that explains this. As a side note, how odd is it that George Carlin played Mr. Conductor next? A bit off topic here, but I found out Santa wasn't real from my 4th grade teacher when we did Secret Santa in class. She started the topic off with, well, we all know Santa isn't real, so let's do Secret Santa in class. I cried. In 3rd grade, my parents were having a raging argument in the kitchen. I told me mom that if she kept yelling, Santa wouldn't bring her any presents. She responded, I am goddamn Santa, and stormed off. I was crushed. Me, at the age of 6. Mom, where do babies come from? Mom, babies come from mommy's bellies when they are much older and want to have babies. Me, so they just appear? Mom, yes. Me, then what are boys for? Mom, nothing really. I grew up thinking boys had no real purpose for existing. Let me tell you, sex ed in the 5th grade blew my world apart. Nothing really. Classic mum. Oh, I've got a humdinger. My family had a cockapoo mix growing up. We called him Gooey. He was mostly my mom's dog, but me and my brother loved that him. One weekend my mom, brother and me were leaving to go visit my grandparents. When we returned, my dad was acting weird and sadly told my mom that he had found Gooey dead one morning while we were gone. My dad said that he was old and he had died in his sleep in his favorite spot. He even took us to the nice little grave he made for him so us kids could say our goodbyes. Fast forward a few months and I have gone with my dad to his job so I could play with his boss's daughter. Me and the daughter are in the yard playing when we see the neighbor kids come outside with a dog. I stopped playing and asked to pet the dog because it looked so much like my old Gooey. I told my dad about the dog right before we left his job that day and he acted surprised and told me to show him which neighbor's house had this dog. My dad is talking with the guy who lives there for some time and then comes back and gets into the car. It's then that he drops the bomb. Apparently, while we were off at the grandparents' house to visit, he had taken Gooey and our 2 other dogs to a local swimming hole so they could get exercise by swimming because it was so hot. Unfortunately, Gooey had run off during the swim and my dad went nuts trying to find him for the rest of the weekend. By Monday he had given up and decided to fake the dog's death. Reason being because he couldn't bear to admit to my mom and us that he lost the dog. So he built a fake little grave and covered it in big pretty rocks so no wild animals would dig it up and told us the dog died of old age. He even threw his back out making the rock mound, which had him out of commission for quite a while. At this point I'm just so happy because Gooey is alive. I'm not even mad at my dad for lying. Dad says he talked to the neighbor who said we could take Gooey back. He just wants us to wait a few days to pick him up so his kids have a chance to say goodbye to the dog. We get back home and I bound through our front door, and before my dad can get a word in I shout to my mother that Gooey is alive. We found him. Mom is understandably confused, looks at my dad's guilty face and puts the whole thing together and proceeds to flip crap on him for lying about the dog. I didn't care though, because I got to get my dead dog back. He ended up living to be about 20. He was a good boy. TLDR. Childhood dog comes back from the dead. I thought you were gonna say that the neighbors ran off with the dog and you never got him back. When I was a little kid, I was sitting in a car at a store parking lot, waiting for my dad. So I see my dad coming back, and 2 guys approach him. They talk for a second, and he gives them his money clip, and they just walk away. Now, my dad is very cheap, and never gave money to anyone, and I always had off-brand everything cause it was cheaper, and he just gave some 2 random dudes a bunch of money. So, I was like, WTF dad, he just said that they needed it more than he did. Only years later when this incident came up, did he reveal that they had a gun, and he got robbed. But it was so casual, it didn't really look like a robbery. They didn't pull out a gun or anything, they just showed it to him in a waistband. That's a good dad. Good for him. Mine also involves a cat, but he was my first pet so there was so much feels involved. I had Brutus since I was 1, but we were going on vacation for the first time, and we dropped my cat Brutus off at my aunt's farm that was about 20 minutes out of town. Someone to babysit him while we were away on vacation. He ran away, and I was heartbroken. 4 months later, Brutus showed up at the end of our street. He had a very specific birthmark on him, so it was definitely the same cat. My dad saw him and his jaw dropped. He was with us until I was 18. Found out later, at the age of 22, Aunt was not babysitting and in fact they were trying to get rid of him. Brutus did not let that happen. My parents got owned. TLDR. Parents tried to get rid of pet, lied to me saying aunt had to babysit. Pet finds his way home 4 months later. And that kid's is the adult version of Homeward Bound. When I was about 7 years old, I came home from school to my mother sitting on the couch waiting for me. She told me that my bird, Noel, had died that day. I was so upset. A couple years ago she admitted to me that she had a sinus infection that day and stayed home from work. The bird wouldn't shoot up so she opened the bird's cage, set it on the back porch and let my bird go free. She thinks it's funny. The bird was kind of annoying, I guess. Just put a blanket over the bird's cage and it goes to sleep. Instant quiet. that my father's biological father got sick and died when my father was just a few years old. It turns out bipolar disorder and suicide might as well be stitched into the family crest. On the bright side, my generation is the first to benefit from better drugs and behavioral understanding. Go, us. In your parents' defense, in a way he did sort of get sick and then die. They were just really spot on the exact details and mechanics of it. Still, that's a really tough thing to inherit genetically, and I'm glad to hear you're doing better than he did. Keep on keeping on. Best wishes, brother. I used to have this huge stuffed teddy bear. I slept with it every night. My mom's boyfriend at the time was a truck driver, and they told me he took it along for a ride with him once to use as a pillow. He didn't have it when he came home, and he told me that he had given it to a little homeless girl, and it had made her so happy. I had proudly told everyone at school about the story, and even had my teachers pray for the little girl. I was in a Catholic school. My mom was just sick of the thing, and they didn't want me to be upset she had thrown it out. She told me years later, when I happened to bring up the story. Your mum is mean. My sister got a budgie on her birthday when she was very young. On the first night it escaped from the cage and our Bernese mountain dog ate it. My father woke up in the morning, realized what happened, raced to the pet store at the mall, bought an identically colored budgie and put it in the cage. My sister didn't learn about it until like 10-15 years later, long after the bird had died. He had forgotten about it but brought it up one day. Along the same lines, I had a goat and a duck. The two were inseparable. I mean that very literally. The goat raped the duck nearly every waking minute. At the time, I didn't know what they were doing. My parents just told me they were hugging, wrestling, whatever. One day, I came home from school and they were both gone. I was so sad. My mom made up a big, elaborate story about they had run off to have adventures together in the woods and that they'd be back someday. I eventually forgot about the whole thing when we got our Rottweiler. The other day I found a picture of my siblings and I carving pumpkins, and the duck was in it with us. I was like, oh my gosh, Mom, whatever happened to good old Sparta? The duck's name, and napalm. Goat's name I wish I hadn't asked. The goat raped the duck to death, then proceeded to try and eat its corpse anus first. When my mom discovered the scene, she was so disgusted she drove the goat to the nearest farm and threw it over the fence. My father went by later and talked to the farmer. He said he'd keep my dad updated. My dad actually kinda loved the little fellow. Not 2 weeks later the goat was ripped limb from limb by a coyote. Childhood. I don't know whether to laugh or cry. I was told my grandma couldn't stand up for a long time because she was old. I wondered why my other grandma could stand up fine. Turns out she had bone cancer and my parents didn't tell me because they didn't want me to treat her differently. Growing up, we had continual squirrel infestations in our attic. It drove my dad crazy. So, we decided to buy a no-kill animal trap and release them several miles away in a nearby forest. They would disappear for a few days but would eventually end up their way home. This must have happened more than 20 times. Then one day, they stopped coming back. I asked my dad what happened and he explained that he drove them into the country, very far away, and released them. I never thought any different. Until recently. One night at dinner my father confessed that he did not take the squirrels to the country. He put them into a plastic garbage bin, put the lid on, duct taped it shut and cut a circular hole in the side. He then ran a large PVC pipe from the exhaust of his car to the bottom of the sealed garbage bin and turned his car on. The squirrels died. My dad is Squirrel Hitler. I found a kitten under my brother's car. His car wasn't working at the time, and I brought it in. It was so long ago that it's hard to remember. Anyways, it was really cute and I took care of it, and my parents told me she ran away. But later my parents actually told me the truth. And the truth was that they purposely made it drink antifreeze to kill it. They're such buttholes. From the first until the 3rd grade I had an English teacher who I really adored. She was always kind and happy and a generally nice person. Always with a smile on her face. You could see that she loved kids and teaching. She always talked about moving to London. I'm from Russia originally. 2 months before my family moved to Germany she disappeared. I asked my mom, if she knew anything about this, and she said that my teacher finally managed to move to Britain. 10 years forward and the topic came up again because I was curious why our teacher left without telling us anything. My mother told me that my teacher was on vacation on her land house and apparently 2 disgusting buttholes raped her there and killed her afterwards. I was so shocked and angry at my mother not saying it earlier. Now, being 22, I am grateful that my mom didn't tell me until I was old enough to understand. Still, I'd wish I had a chance to say goodbye, and I hope these 6 got what they deserve. When I was younger, I had a pet goat. After a while, my parents had to give it away. They told me that they sent him to the farm that he was born on. Turns out that a Jamaican family bought him and ate him. Those jerks. When my dad died, my mom told me that he went in his sleep and it was painless. I was 16 at the time and I needed to hear that. It was only years later that my brother confessed how awful his actual passing was. My mom told us my dad was in remission. It's a miracle. A blessing from God, my family members said. She left out the part where remission simply meant the cancer stopped spreading and not gone as most people think. Quite the shock when 3 months later it was suddenly in his brain. Not technically a lie, just admitting the truth. My mum led me to believe that she had dated my dad for 5 years before they got married, and used to tell me several times only an idiot would marry a stranger. According to her, anyone who you haven't known for at least 2 years, etc. I'm with my so 6 months now and we are very serious about each other. My mum knows, so asked me a few questions, which prompted me to ask her outright how long her and dad had been dating before he popped the question. She muttered something non-committal, and when I pushed her for an answer, the truth finally came out. 3 months. He asked her to marry him within 3 months. She said no, lol, and told him to ask her a few months later. He asked her at 5 months. She said yes, and they were married before they'd been going out a year. I'm 22, and my mum managed to keep it a secret all these years. Well played, mother, well played. Maybe she was trying to warn you not to make the same mistake she did without having to admit her mistake. This is not to say your parents don't have a good marriage, but maybe at some point and she realized that in retrospect she wishes she had known some things about her husband, gotten to know him better before marrying him. Our rabbit died. He was getting sick. My mom told us he died peacefully during HTE night. Turns out my dad snapped his neck. Well, at least he died quickly. My great-grandpa was a soldier in World War II. Later I did some family digging and found out that he was in the Luftwaffe. Not all men who fought for Germany were evil. In the same way, not all men who fought for the USA were good. Not my parents, but my grandma denied knowing any details about our national origin when I asked. She just said whatever we are, we love each other. She had an eerily apologetic tone. Later my dad told me he knew definitively that we had Jewish-Polish ancestry, and he knew this because his grandparents, my grandma's parents, were first-generation immigrants and had been alive when he was a kid. I had a friend who didn't find out he was Jewish until he was 20. His grandmother had been old enough during the Holocaust to have it completely ingrained in her head to deny. My mum and dad told me and my brother that we got a hamster because they saved it from a cat trying to eat it. Then when its eyes changed color, they said hamsters could do that. We later found out that my brother had taken the hamster to bed with him, rolled over him in the middle of the night. When he got up for school, my brother didn't realize, so my mum bought a new one before we came home. Your brother is an idiot. My dad, a World War II vet and POW, told us kids that the Germans never mistreated him or his buddies when he was a POW. It was convincing, as he went on to tell us at length the stories of his time in World War II Germany. Many years later, when he was watching Schindler's List on TV, we could hear him in the other room telling his wife about how they did that to us, and that too, during certain scenes. Santa is symbols, man. My trust was irrevocably shaken the day I found out Santa was simply an illusion used to manipulate me with my own greed. To make it worse, my parents didn't come clean about it. They just kept going, doing more elaborate things every year to convince me Santa was real. They still haven't had a talk with me about it, and I'm 30. My mom told me when I was 7 so my dad couldn't accuse her of lying to me in court during the divorce. When I was 15 years old I had a higher than normal white blood cell count and was suffering from anemia. My symptoms pointed to me having either leukemia or sickle cell anemia, which my parents never told me. Turned out I had a 1 in a million genetic disorder where my bones are slightly denser than a normal person, accounting for an elevated white blood cell count. When I was little, my grandma told me my cousin Dana died because someone at school poisoned her milk. When I was about 25, I was talking to my mom about it and she gets out all of these newspaper clippings. Apparently, Dana's had been put in a camp because she had been caught taking drugs. She wanted out so badly that she drank rat poison, but when she told the counselors, they did not believe her and tied her to a chair until she died. Needless to say, the family had the camp shut down. I was pretty upset they had lied to me all of those years, but in retrospect, it was a really good thing I didn't know the truth. Not for my own benefit, but my parents told me that Milanos were grown-up cookies and had something in them that children weren't supposed to eat or it would mess them up, like raw egg or alcohol or one of those other things I wasn't allowed. Only stupid, irresponsible parents put them in their kids' lunches. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.